Good afternoon. I was reminded by Professor Olivier that we are already behind schedule, and because we were supposed to start at 11:25, it's now past 12. So we have limited time. So let me start without wasting time. My name is Kenandai Tjivikau. I'll be sharing this session. The title of the session is The State of Social Protection in the Context of COVID-19, Regional and Country Findings. We'll have 3 presentations, and I was requested to limit it to 10 minutes instead of 15. The first presentation will be made by Professor Rodreck Mupedziswa. He's a professor of social work at the University of Botswana for the past 15 years, and currently serving as a consultant with DA Isako University, Gaborone, setting up a center of excellence in issues pertaining to empowerment of vulnerable groups. He will present on informal sector operators and social protection in Botswana in an area of COVID-19 issues. Issues, challenges, and lessons learned. Professor Mupedziswa, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Allow me
minutes.
to share my... I don't know why it's saying disabled, host disabled screen sharing. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, the host has disabled my screen sharing. I need to share my screen.
Okay, you can speak to the presentation. Yeah, you are requested to open the presentation again. They've given you access now.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll just realize there are issues here. Yes, thank you. My presentation is titled Informal Sector Operators and Social Protection in Botswana in an Era of COVID, Challenges and Lessons Learned. Well, when COVID first visited in early 2020, the government in Botswana came up with some regulations. Of course, this was something that happened across the world. Mandatory closure of facilities and also restrictions in movement of people. That is what happened. The country is diamond rich, as we know, so the economy is generally, good, but because of COVID, there were challenges, and the economy sort of took a knock like any other. So COVID negatively impacted the economy of the country. I'm going to just run through because to get to the point that I want to make, since I'm given 10 minutes only. I'm going to skip most of the issues, but to mention that the country came up with what they call the Economic Response Plan, and that plan they put into place. But the issue about the plan is that it focused on industry and on individuals, but it forgot one important sector, which is the informal sector. It was forgotten until much later. The industry got some relief, and the individuals got food hampers. But as I say, the informal sector initially was forgotten. Yeah. Hello? Yes.
Yes. We only see your last slide on conclusion, but I don't know whether on which slide you are now.
Oh, is that right? I thought you were seeing all the slides. Oh. Anyway, allow me to just speak, right? Since I have 10 minutes only, otherwise I'll spend 10 minutes for fighting this thing. Is that right? Is that okay? Yeah.
Share screen.
Oh, can you see it? Can you see anything?
Share your screen.
I'm not sharing. It's not sharing.
Okay, just let us continue speaking to the presentation because we are running out of time, sir.
Yeah. I don't know now what has happened. Oh no. I have lost everything now.
Yes, please just continue talking to the presentation because we are running out of time. You don't need to share the screen.
I wanted to share because, I am now, you have put me in a difficult position. I can't.
I suggest you just continue talking and leave the presentation.
Yeah. Okay.
Prof?
Yes. You can hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So I was saying the initial response left out the informal sector. And the informal sector is one sector that had been very badly, impacted, because when there was lockdown, informal sector operators were not able to do anything. They had to stay home. And as the UNDP says, evidently directives such as stay at home and a directive like social distance tend to be antithetical to the very nature of informal sector activities. So the informal sector suffered a lot and had been left out of the initial program of trying to mitigate the impact of COVID-19. But the government later came up with the Botswana National Informal Sector Recovery Plan. And this was meant to support the informal sector and to try and help it build resilience and future, against the future shocks. And the Botswana National Informal Sector Recovery Plan emerged following extensive consultations, which was a big plus. I've been listening to colleagues presenting. I think one thing that has been lacking is extensive consultations. Now, in this case, the consultations included representatives of informal sector associations and the informal sector participants themselves, and the representatives of relevant government ministries and even parastatals. So all these were involved in coming up with the informal sector plan, the recovery plan. And now the two goals of this plan were establishment of informal sector facilitation structures within the first year of COVID, and the second would be economic revitalization of the informal sector. And they also formed what was called, and it also recommended formation of what was called informal sector agency. The issue here is that many of our countries are totally against the informal sector. Or those that is sort of are not too against, they pay lip service to activities in the informal sector. But the government of Botswana came up with a plan to say, yes, we recognize the important role of the informal sector. And for this reason, we are coming up with a recovery plan. I have noted that in many countries, when we say we recognize informal sector, we are talking of SMMEs, small scale enterprises. But for the person who is selling tomatoes in one corner of a road, they set dogs on them, they arrest them, or they confiscate their wares. But in the case of Botswana, all these were, taken on board. They were not harassed, and this arose from the fact that the coming up of the plan, they involved extensive consultations, as I said. Those consultations enabled an appreciation of the fact that you do need even those that are selling their tomatoes and things, to be involved. So
hello,
I
Prof.
am saying that,
you have 2 minutes left.
Yes.
2 minutes remaining.
So I'm saying,
could you please conclude?
SADC countries can take a leaf from Botswana's experience, which involves coming out clearly and recognizing the role that the informal sector plays. I am aware that, in the case of many countries, there is no, appreciation of this fact. And some have argued that if you do this, then you are formalizing the informal sector. But my argument in the paper is that, you can assist the informal sector without necessarily formalizing it. because formalization of the informal, there is a huge debate on that, whether it's important to do that, whether it's necessary, whether players in this sector want to be formalized. But the fact is, generally, studies have shown that they want to remain on the outskirts. They don't want to be formalized. So you can assist them without formalization of the informal sector. So what am I saying? I'm simply saying one important lesson is that our countries should appreciate the important role of the informal sector in its totality, including those that sell airtime on the roadside, including those that sell tomatoes and the like, right? And bring them together and try to assist them without really formalizing the informal. I think that's really the message. I'm sorry, I got a bit detracted with the fact that we ended up with it less than the 10 minutes that I was allocated. Thank you very much for that. I rest my case.
Thank you very much, Prof. Mupedziswa. May I now request Mrs. Anna Wolkenhauer to present on social policy and state formation, comparative insights for social cash transfers, and FISP in Zambia. Mrs. Wolkenhauer is a postdoctoral researcher at the Institute of Intercultural and International Studies at the University of Bremen in Germany. She wrote her PhD thesis on social protection and state formation in Zambia, and currently works on rural politics and development, knowledge production, and global social policy. Mrs. Wolkenhauer, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Kenandai. All right. So because we've swapped the two presentations, I think we have to wait another second for mine to appear on the screen. There we go. Thanks. So thanks very much for chairing this panel, and thanks also again to FES and SASPEN for organizing this conference so well. I'm really glad to be back at the SASPEN conference finally. Right, let me use this opportunity to share some of the findings from my PhD research, which was completed last year. But these things are still ongoing in my mind, at least. So I'm still very much looking forward to your questions and comments. While I have not studied the social protection response to COVID per se, I think my findings have become, well, very relevant once more based on the recent experience with COVID, which has shown us how important it is to have the necessary infrastructure and state capacity in place for implementing social policies, especially in times of severe crises. Given the limited time, I might skip some of the findings I wanted to present, but I'm always happy to talk more about them later. Right, so I'll try and give a bit of a, well, like a complete picture of my research, but then focus on a few issues in particular. So first of all, my research question and my research approach, just to be transparent about this. So I started with two observations. The first one was this obvious proliferation of social protection policies across many African countries that follow on a period of severe state withdrawal. So it seemed that the state was reappearing through social policies in many countries. The other observation was a more academic one, and that's the very, in my view, very unsatisfying conceptualization of African states in much of the political science literature and development studies literature. So I used these two observations to come up with a question that I think connects both of them, and that's, how is the state being reconstituted after this period of neoliberal retrenchment? And I wanted to study the state bottom up, if you like. So I basically talked to lots of people in ministries in Zambia. So Zambia was my single case study. And most of my field work and data collection took place between 2016 and 2018. Yes, and then it was a qualitative study design, yes, so I'll probably just skip the methods part here. Right, so by my most, well, the core argument, the basic argument is that social protection is not only requires state capacity, but can actually also contribute to state capacity. Social protection can have state formation effects. And I conceptualize state formation as not something that's completed at some point, but that is always ongoing everywhere. But I would also argue that state formation has become particularly important after this period of state withdrawal. Although we can still discuss whether we are actually in a period of after retrenchment or whether retrenchment isn't actually ongoing. And I mean, there are people who argue that, you know, austerity is already on the horizon again. So I think that it remains really crucial to see how much state well is enabled, or how much state capacity really is supported by the social protection policies. Anyway, so the core logic of state formation, I would argue, consists in bridging what I would call the center and then the peripheries, or you could say the political center and then the marginalized areas and marginalized communities. And this connection happens on various levels, so discursively, bureaucratically, politically, and what I would call epistemologically, so related to growing knowledge. But I'll not go into all of these here. But maybe first to explain briefly what I mean by the center-periphery divide. So as I said, my case study was Zambia, and in Zambia, as in other countries, there's a long entrenched divide between, well, those regions that are politically and economically connected and where economic activities are actually taking place, where people are in formal employment, and where people also have a political voice on the one hand. And then on the other hand, you have a majority of the population that are employed informally, and that also basically remain dependent on social assistance programs because they are not covered by any formal social insurance schemes. And even though there have been periods in which the state tried to overcome this bifurcation or this divide, it has pretty much persisted since the colonial era. Now, the two programs I have studied were the social cash transfer and then FISIP, which many of you probably know, the Farmer Input Support Program. And even though both programs emerged around the same time, they have had very different trajectories. So the cash transfer being often cited as a big success story, whereas FISIP has always been a very controversial program. And I would actually also like to, well, basically make a bit of a case for FISIP here, and for strengthening FISIP and also for strengthening the local state within FISIP, because the cash transfer has shown that it is so important and so well relevant to have a proper functioning state in place, and that also this state capacity can grow in the process of implementing social policy. 5 minutes, okay. Right, and both of these programs, I would argue, are somehow reconnecting center and peripheries. Right, and this reconnection, first of all, happens what you could call discursively. So Zambia also introduced well, national development plans in the new millennium after a period of not writing any national development plans. And in many ways now marginalized communities are being well reconnected to the overall story and vision of development. So there's this aim of not leaving anyone behind. So that's almost like a statement of purpose of reconnecting those that had fallen, well, basically off the radar for a long time. In the process, responsibilities are being constructed, responsibilities for social development and for growth. And this is, on the one hand, the responsibility of the state. So in my interviews, I always encountered this, or I often encountered this view that obviously you need a functioning bureaucracy, you need a state with a vision and with capacity to ensure that there is widespread and inclusive growth, and that government is there to help people. On the other hand, it also becomes clear that every individual in Zambia is well viewed as being responsible for contributing to this growth. So social policy is also something that's supposed to enable people to contribute to a wider aim of national development. And this creates some ambiguities, and this relates also to well, what has been very widespread, and that's the targeting. So the selective provision of social protection to particular groups of what are sometimes considered the poorest parts of the population. So on the one hand, actually, the fact that people live in severe poverty is a precondition for making social policies seem legitimate state interventions. So state interventions are legitimized by the fact that people are actually very poor and they need to be supported. At the same time, social policy is also very much supposed to kickstart development, as I said before. So people are supposed to be enabled to help themselves. And this is the case in the cash transfer as well as in FISIP, even though it occurs in different ways. So in the cash transfer also, people are praised and it's very much appreciated when they invest the small transfer in some sort of productive assets or productive activities. In FISIP, there's the need for farmers to graduate after a certain period of time.
Can you move to conclusion?
Okay, well, yeah, being brief is not really one of my strengths. Right, so in effect, I would say that social policy becomes one site for the state not only to assume responsibility to look after its citizens, but actually also for shifting responsibilities to people through the way in which social policy is being, well, conceptualized. All right, so that's so much for the discursive and the ambiguous discursive connection that's established. The other one I wanted to look into before I learned about the 10-minute rule is that actually social protection can also contribute to what I would call bureaucratic rule. So this is a term borrowed from sociology that basically refers to, well, the state implementing its kind of categories and standards and ways of viewing society, and implementing and transporting these standards into, well, basically the communities. And in the social cash transfer, this is done with the help of local volunteer committees. And it's done quite successfully. So the so-called CWACs manage the social cash transfer in very successful ways and enable the state to actually reach out bureaucratically even to outlying areas. In contrast, in FISIP, this kind of fruitful connection between the local state bureaucracy and the communities does not really materialize. So the farming cooperatives, which are responsible for, basically are responsible for sharing e-vouchers or FISIP inputs amongst their members, they are pretty much left left alone because of a lack of local state capacity. And there has not really been a concerted effort in strengthening the local implementation structures of the Ministry of Agriculture.
The
right?
time is up.
Okay, am I allowed one last sentence?
Yes.
All right, so basically at the end of the day, I think it all boils down to understanding better how we can strengthen state bureaucracy in order to make social protection work, but also to understand vice versa, how social protection can contribute to strengthening, well, not only the capacity, but actually also the image of the local state, which has been so controversial. Thanks very much for your attention.
I'm really sorry for the inconvenience, but I have received clear instructions from Professor Olifield. I must control this thing. I know it does not look like good manners.
I know it's not a nice role that
it's not that I don't have good manners. It's just I need to disturb because I have good instructions. Thank you very much. We are going to the last presenter. We'll present on social protection, a forgotten aspect during COVID-19 crisis. That's the topic. The presenter is Dr. John Mushomi, who will also present visually. He is a holder of a doctoral of philosophy in population studies and has 14 years of research and policy practice experience in population and development. He's a research and policy fellow at AFI DEP and a lecturer at the Department of Population Studies, Makerere University. Professor Mushomi, the floor is yours and strictly 10 minutes. So
many thanks.
Quarter to one, you should be done. Thank you very much.
Many thanks. I want to thank you very much for the kind introduction. I apologize because I'm making this presentation while I am in the deep villages in Mombasa doing field work. I will be speaking to my PowerPoints because I'll be sharing them later. My computer is not with me, and I will be speaking the points, and I will share the PowerPoint with the program coordinators after my speech. So I present an analysis of in my paper analysis on Uganda's approach to response to COVID-19 crisis, and I have coined my analysis paper to which social protection either was forgotten or was approached from a limited point of view, and therefore liable to question, but also questions whether Uganda's approach was timely, whether it was exhaustive in terms of working with the different sectors or working with the different departments of government. And the third, we speak to our analysis input to whether social protection in Uganda is sustainable moving forward, whether Uganda is prepared to respond to other eventualities, to other issues that affect community when on a high rate. I want to mention at this moment in time that our approach was an analytical review of actions, of policies and actions by government and stakeholders in Uganda. The first perspective that we look at was timeliness. Uganda government was one of the countries that was alerted, that was alarmed by the COVID crisis, and was able to act on the recommendations of World Health. And in the region, Uganda government is the one which implemented a complete and total lockdown from the time it was announced, and it maintained the consistency. It maintained, and up to now, there are sections of society, of businesses, that have not operated since March 2020. And one of the sectors that have suffered most is the informal sector, and the approach to social protection did not consider aspects of social protection in terms of implementation. And that is why we question whether social protection was not a forgotten approach. The Ugandan policy in Uganda on social protection covers the senior citizens, and the COVID-19 affected the programming for senior citizens in terms of social protection, because in that perspective, Uganda has not remained consistent even in terms of the program that were existing already. We question in the aspect of timeliness, Uganda immediately acted on social protection by providing food supplies to the affected communities, and the analysis, the timeliness is considered to have been sufficient. Having sufficient timeliness did not leave flaws to the approach, because Uganda immediately acted on food distribution among urban poor. The distribution and the selection of those who were urban poor was guided by the National Bureau of Statistics on the poor, and was from the national statistics. What we mentioned, what we analyzed in that approach was that there was a wrong interpretation or a limited interpretation of who the poor is, because food distribution was only limited to urban centers, and therefore those in peri-urban and those in rural areas and those who were in informal sector whose businesses closed were not considered. The food distribution was not sufficient because its coverage was extremely limited. And we see this as a flaw in terms of the approach, the programmatic approach to social protection. The second aspect we question in our analysis in our analysis of our paper, we question to what extent food distribution protection actions worked with the different sectors in the government. We take note that the Office of the Prime Minister was in charge of collecting all the food supplies.
You have 2 minutes remaining.
The response, we has a limitation in terms of the whole of government approach, which would have been a better option in terms of responses to COVID-19 protection. And therefore, some sectors of the economy or some sectors of the government might not have put in an equal effort to contribute to meeting the needs of the poor, to identifying the poor and implementation. But to a bigger extent, we saw different sectors, different ministries, departments and agencies come together, contribute to an extent, identifying the different sects of the community that they serve is questionable according to our analytical paper. The third question we asked was the sustainability of social protection actions by the government. We question whether Uganda has recorded lessons, whether Uganda has noted aspects to pass on, either in terms of its response to epidemics, in terms of its response to emergencies. And we do not think that this has been adequately addressed in terms of Uganda's approach. First, the first round of distribution of food, in terms of self-assessment at the government level, they thought it would have been better to contribute to pass on assistance through mobile money transfers. And this was implemented in the second round of lockdowns. Uganda has implemented 2 lockdowns so far, and the second round, the government implemented mobile transfers of money to the different stakeholders. Again, in terms of selection, the statistics, the National Bureau of Statistics worked with the UNDP and development partners statistical bases, and the right people were identified. Again, as it was anticipated in the previous lockdown, that many would have been reached more easily, it was more problematic. We do not think it has met its goal because there were limitations with sending money. The government indicated that anyone who had done a transaction beyond about $200 would not receive the assistance. Yet sometimes money is used for different reasons. And therefore, a good number of the poor people in Uganda still missed out the mobile transfers. And in addition, there is still the process was still marred with the various limitations of corruption and lack of transparency. And up to now, some people still wait for the transfers from government, yet according to government, transfers have been finished. And therefore, this did not meet the anticipated improvement as indicated in the analysis approach by the government. With these few thoughts, I would like to end it here, and I'll be sharing my full presentation with the program with the program coordinators for uploading on the website and sharing. I thank you very much, colleagues.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mushomi. We really appreciate your presentation. And now we are opening the floor for 5 minutes for question and answer. I have not noticed any questions on the chat. While we are waiting, can Mrs. Wolkenhauer say something while we're waiting for people to pose questions? Yeah. Perhaps is there something that you would wanted to elaborate on further?
Yeah, thank you. I think I'd rather donate the extra minute to the Q&A, and I also see that Isaac has raised his hand.
Any question?
Yes, I have a question.
Yes, please proceed.
Yes, I've got 3 questions. One for Rodreck from Botswana and 2 questions for Anna. For Rodreck from Botswana, you made an excellent presentation. I've also been doing studies here in Zambia on informal economy workers in the context of COVID-19. Now, I would like to find out from him, in his analysis, what matters in provision of social protection to informal economy workers? Was it political will, or was it physical space of the Botswanan government? I talked about, but I want to hear from him. Was it really attributed to political will? Was it economic space? Then when I come to Anna, you presented an excellent presentation. However, I was wondering to myself, given the broadness of the state of social protection in Zambia, I know from my presentation that in Zambia we have 5 pillars. So in your studies, I wanted to find out, did you study all the 5 pillars, and do all the 5 pillars have the same effects? And then in the second question, which I have for you is, in your conclusion, you talked about the effects of social policy on state formation. And looking again at the broadness of the field of social policy, what type of social policy do you think that it builds the state, or those forms of social policy which you think that if not adequately implemented, they may end up destabilizing the state? Thank you.
Thank you. Let's start with the other presenter, the first question, before we come to Mrs. Wolkenhauer. Yes, Prof.
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
Mupedziswa.
Thank you very much.
Mupedziswa.
Yes. Thank you for that question. It is, in fact, in my view, it's both political will and also economic space. If you are familiar with social protection in Botswana, you know it's one of those countries that has, it has 10 different social protection programs, which is also partly because of economic space, the management, good management of the diamond mineral, I think, which has resulted in that. But the political will is also very evident in the case of Botswana. So I would say, yes, it's both political will. Some of our countries, the economic space might be there, the minerals and things may be there, but you may find that a lot of it goes into corruption and the like. But in the case of Botswana, these two, and also, it's according to the Africa Barometer, it's one of the least corrupt countries in the world. Yeah. So, they seem to be doing things right this side. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Anna?
Thanks, Isaac, for your questions. Right, so yes, you're right to mention the 5 pillars. So this is not the direction that I started from, but obviously the programs that I studied, they, to a large extent, they cut across several of these pillars, right? So protective and promotive. And I think it's very good, as Muthala also mentioned earlier, it's good to take this systemic view. So to see also how these programs maybe manage to have a protective function, while at the same time also leading to some more long-term ways of empowering people to earn an income, right? So I think it's a good idea to actually bear these pillars in mind. And for me, I should probably also have made them a little bit more central. Right, and then the other question I find even more interesting about the kind of the types of social protection that might be particularly effective for building, well, state capacity and what I would call bureaucratic reach and bureaucratic rule. So I think generally speaking, what we really want to see is, well, long-term structures that are put in place and that are not so vulnerable to fluctuating resources, and that are maybe not completely dependent on, well, on donor resources. So that you can build structures where people can also over the long run voice their concerns and make demands to the state. And maybe besides that, I would always emphasize that social policies should be working hand in hand with other types of policies directed at socioeconomic development, so economic policies. Social policy really can only do so much as long as you don't have a strategy of economic diversification, right? So social policies should be seen also as supporting, a wider transformation, structural transformation. And I think if these can work hand in hand, it can have much more lasting effects. I hope I've answered your questions.
Yes, last round for questions, please. You may proceed.
My question is to Prof. Mupedziswa. I'm Nicola Yon from Zimbabwe. I applaud Botswana for its initiatives in the informal sector and would like access to the paper that you mentioned, given Zimbabwe's initiatives in the informal sector. An important question you made, which made me realize, is that do these in the informal sector want to be formalized? A question that I feel Zimbabwe has not yet asked, but is very important to be asked. I, however, wanted to find out if, in your opinion, Botswana's initiatives are sustainable in the long run, and if it is committed to these people in the informal sector, or is it just a response to the COVID-19, which will soon fade away? Thank you.
Yes. Another question? Any other person? None. Okay. Prof, can you respond to that?
Yes, please. Thank you very much for the question. Yeah, I think that there are the elements of sustainability. I think there will be some sustainability, given that they've brought up these people together, and there is participation of the beneficiaries. But obviously, you know, if you're looking at handouts alone will not, you know, be sustainable. And I've argued against the giving of handouts, but I have often said, yes, handouts for a short-term, you know, measure, but for the long term, you want to go beyond. I have often given the example of a tap that is leaking. You don't want to focus on mopping water from the leaking tap. You want to look at issues around fixing the tap, and well, that might mean, you know, activities that are sustainable, you know, so issues around sustainability. If you look at my paper, you will see that they've come up with measures which, to me, suggest there, you know, there is emphasis on trying to make these activities sustainable. You know, I have covered that to some extent in the paper. That I suppose only time will tell. But if you look at what has happened in the past, you know, there is a genuine, in my view, a political will to try and make this sustainable. But of course, you know, the country has a small economic base, you know, based on diamonds. And one big debate that has always been going on is how do we diversify this economy? I think at the end of the day, for sustainability to happen, there is need for diversification of the country's economy. You know, depending on diamonds alone, I mean, I think of the situation of Zambia at some point, copper. And when the price of copper fell, there were challenges. So indeed, for sustainability to happen in big letters, there is need for diversification of the economy. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we give 1 minute to Dr. Mushomi? Just 1 minute thought or 2 minutes, and then Anna Wolkenhauer another 1 minute so that we can conclude and close the session. Dr. Mushomi, 1 minute or 2 minutes, final thoughts. Okay, perhaps we have lost him. Anna Wolkenhauer, can you give us your final thoughts, 1 or 2 minutes, to conclude the session?
Yes, thanks. Maybe on a more general note, I think what this conference shows again is also how important it is for policymakers, civil society, and researchers to work hand in hand, right? And I think this is really something that SASPEN as a network can facilitate, so that we can make sure that the research that we do, and I sometimes feel like I'm quite detached, as a German academic studying social protection in Zambia. So my aim is also really to find out how can research be done in a way that's actually politically helpful and relevant. So maybe, I know this is now very broad what I'm saying, but I just wanted to use this opportunity to say how important I find SASPEN as a network to bring people together from these different fields to find ways of, furthering these aims that we all look for, broadening social protection and also linking social protection with what Professor Rodreck just said, and what I also said earlier, how to combine social protection with wider aims of, equality and distribution.
And the state formation, what do you think lastly about that?
And well, maybe last comment, yes, I think we shouldn't circumvent the state structures in implementing social protection, but see how we can strengthen them in the process.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think we have come to the closure of this session, and I'm giving it the chair back to the Secretariat. Thank you very much.